Okay, any questions first of all? Cool. All right, so we're going to talk about a bunch of stuff today. Going to look at, what we're going to look at, one of the main things we're going to look at today is how to go about automating the creation of our instances, right? So we've seen sort of this kind of where we're able to create it with a bunch of manual control through the help of the AWS console. So we're going to look at some processes for automating that. Before we do that, I want to briefly introduce you to Amazon's flavor of Linux, and you'll kind of see why that's relevant in a bit. So let's talk about that. Let's dive right in there. So let me just pop into EC2 here, and I'll go ahead and launch an instance. And you notice that here's the Amazon Linux instance. So let me go ahead and just click select for that. And yep, I'll go ahead and pick those defaults. That's just fine. Security group. Let's see. Oops, sorry. Yes. Right. There is so I created I've already created a group, the allow SSH from USF group, which basically has the CIDR block for USF. Okay. So actually, what I'm going to do, because I want both, so let me create. I'm just going to create another group. Allow SSH. Let's just do. All right, so there's that. So for the custom, there's that one. Let me go ahead and add another one for HTTP, and same deal. Just add in USF's CIDR block there. Okay. So there's those. Let's see, instances. Yeah, we don't need any of that for right now. Right, and so let me go ahead. I'll just use that key. And yeah, launch the instance. Okay. So Amazon's Linux is based on CentOS, another flavor of Linux. So PuTTY. Let me do this. So a couple of things. First, I need the public DNS. Just like before. So paste that in there. This doesn't come from, this isn't Ubuntu, so the default user is not Ubuntu. The default user is EC2-user. Okay, so yeah, let me go ahead and save that, and I'll do an open. Okay, and there we are. Right, so we have this. We have logged into to Amazon's Linux. So most of the commands, like we know and love, basically already are here. Some of the things. So for instance, we don't have apt. You'll notice they're using yum. Right. So I can do things like so. Well, let's do this. Okay, so let's see if right. Notice there's nothing listening on port 80. right? So looking along here, so we see 22, we see 25, right? But no port 80s. Basically, the web server is not installed and running on this system. Okay. So how do we actually go about doing that? Well, basically, we need to install it, and just like we saw in the past, we can use the appropriate package tool. Thanks. For making this happen, but we basically need to know which package, right? So just as we can use the apt cache command for searching within for the apt repos, we can use yum and search, and for instance search for Apache, and you'll see we get a whole bunch of results, right? So again, let me pipe this through less, so we can kind of get a better idea, right? So you notice there's a bunch of things here seemingly related to Apache. It turns out actually that there is this nice little package HTTPD that will basically install all of that, what we need for Apache. So again, we're going to run it as the super user, yum install and HTTPD. Okay, right, looks a little bit different, but similar types of things. Okay, the various dependencies and so forth. Is this okay? I'll hit Y for yes, and it will run through and install. Right, let's see. Net stat. Okay. And you'll notice, let's see. So we don't actually, again, we don't seem to have a web server running, and again, we can verify that by. Oops. Ah. Okay. Now, the program is in fact installed, but it turns out that the package for CentOS doesn't basically start it up for us, right? So we need to actually start that. So we can use sudo, use the service command. Let's see the process that we want to start, HTTPD, and tell it to start that, right? So now it claims that it is doing that, and we can see, sure enough, there's something listening on port 80. Okay, come back over to here and run this, and there it is. Okay. So there's its default page and so forth. Okay. Questions about that?
So we don't require a LAMP server in Amazon?
Pardon? You could actually do a LAMP server. You'd have to actually install the additional. So you'd need to install MySQL. You need to install PHP as well, right? There isn't under CentOS the equivalent of TaskCell. Okay. All right. Anyway, so let's go back to that a minute. So again, if you take a look at var dub, right, we'll see we do see the var dub HTML folder. Notice that there's also actually a couple of other folders that have gotten created as well. If we take a look at there's the HTML folder and its contents, you'll notice basically it is empty right now. Okay, so let's actually just throw something in there. Sudo nano var dub HTML index.html. Okay. All right. Sure, save that. Let's double check the permissions there. Right, and the main thing that I'm looking for is this one here, that it is world readable. That way when we load this up, we should actually get that. Yeah. Okay. So my index.html basically replaced the default page that was being displayed previously. Okay. Questions, issues? Cool.
What does that D stands in HTTPD?
I'm sorry, say that again?
What does that D stands for in the command like?
Oh, the HTTPD?
Yeah.
Daemon. DAEMON, right? So in Linux, typically we talk about daemon processes. Basically, they're long-running processes, typically servers and those kinds of things. So yeah, that's what the D is for. All right, so yeah, that basically gives you an idea of or at least kind of a quick introduction to that. So, as I said, what I really wanted to talk about, I can't seem to navigate this and talk. Okay, there we go, terminate. Yes. Okay, so as I said, all this stuff from the console is great. And certainly, if you're charged with building up the infrastructure for your company, whether you're a networks administrator, whether you're working in DevOps, whether you're a developer, etc., these are skills that are important to have because typically, while we're going to move into sort of a scripted version of setting these things up, the bottom line is the way that you sort of test these things out or figure out what it is that you're going to have to do is pretty much by doing it manually. Right? So when I sit down and I say, okay, you know, I need to have a LAMP server, and I'm going to need to have these files, and I'm going to need to have my application on there, and maybe I need to have these additional libraries on there. I'm not going to sit down and write a whole script for actually doing that. What I'm going to first do is spin up a server. I'm going to install the various libraries, kind of take notes and all that, or use my history, right? And basically test it out to see, okay, is this going to work? Then I can move into a framework of where I can actually automate those tasks. Okay, so again, I mean, you can sort of use these things in tandem as needed. All right. So, what we're talking about here, so there's a number of different acronyms that you oftentimes see. So, for instance, one is PAAS, typically spelled this way. So, capital P, really. Not even close. All right. PAAS. Anybody? Platform as a service, right? So there's a few of these. There's platform as a service, there's infrastructure as a service, et cetera, et cetera. Generally, Amazon's kind of considered platform as a service, so it's a little bit higher up than just raw infrastructure, right? They are providing a number of services and so forth. So we're dealing with this kind of platform as service, and then when we get into this idea of automating the creation of your infrastructure, okay, what we talk about is infrastructure as code. Okay, that is, we're going to write code to define the infrastructure that we want created. Okay. Now, a lot of times, especially in IT, you're like, I'm not a programmer. First of all, you are a programmer. Look at the pillars of look at the pillars of IT. 3 out of 5 of the pillars are programming related. But beyond that, even if your programming skills aren't super strong, it's okay, because we're really using kind of markup languages for actually specifying this. So we're not really sort of writing full-blown code in sort of a general purpose programming language and all of that. And you'll see what I mean in a minute. All right, so I'll leave that open for right now. All right, so basically the stuff that we're looking at is down here under Management Tools, CloudFormation. Okay. So CloudFormation basically allows you, as I said, to define your infrastructure in terms of code files. Now, there's a couple of things about this. So first of all, it turns out that actually Amazon has provided you a bunch of these kind of what are called template files for generating architecture in particular things. So let me give you an example, right? So they talk about this notion of a stack, right? Because you can think about this in terms of, we're not just talking about, for instance, just a particular server. We may be talking about security groups. We may be talking about multiple security groups. We might be talking about multiple servers. We might be talking about actually configuring the entirety of the virtual networking within our site, et cetera, et cetera. Almost everything that you can do manually, or basically everything you do manually, you can actually sort of configure here as well. Okay, so let me just go ahead. I'll say create new stack. Now, the good news is that you don't have to start. You don't have to start basically completely from scratch, right? So, as I said, so there are a number of templates basically that Amazon gives you. There are community provided templates as well. Here's some of the sample templates, right? So, for instance, here's a LAMP stack that basically will set up LAMP on Amazon's Linux image. Okay, now let me go ahead and just launch this just so you can kind of see what this looks like, and then we'll kind of dig into the details and all of that. But you'll notice you can also do things like upload a file, which is actually what we're going to do a little later on. You can specify things in an S3 bucket. We haven't really talked about S3 yet, but later on we will, and then you'll kind of have a sense of that. All right, so yeah, there's the LAMP stack. Right. So the first thing, it always asks you for sort of the name of the stack. So I'll just say Amazon. All right. Now, this parameters section is actually configured by the script. Okay, so the scripts or the templates that we're going to create will allow us to have parameter sections like this to allow the user basically to provide input for important kinds of tasks. You can have as many parameters or as few parameters as you would like. Okay, so yeah, I can call that. Let's database password. Let me do so again. I'm just creating the password for the database. Right, the root password for the database, I don't know. Right, the database user, let's call it DB admin, right? Then we have our typical stuff, for instance, the instant type, right? So I'm just going to leave it on small here. The particular key, that is my key pair that I'm going to use for logging in. Right, and then again, the SSH location, basically that's dealing with that whole CIDR stuff and all of that. Wait, don't have it here. Let me go back over. Where's the security group? Right. So I'm only going to allow SSH into that server from basically USF's campus. Right. So all right, there's all of my parameters plugged in and there. Then we have some additional stuff. You can add additional tags and all that. You can deal with IAM roles. Again, we don't have to worry about any of that stuff. I'm just going to go ahead and click next. Basically pops up this stuff, essentially telling us a little bit about, right. So again, this description comes from literally the template itself. Again, we'll look at that. Kind of shows us our details and all that. Let me go ahead and click create. Okay. So the so this will create basically all of the appropriate resources for us. That is, any instances that need to be created, they will be created by the script here. If security groups needed to be created, if other stuff needed to be created, all of that stuff essentially is going to happen from the stack. What that also means is it makes it really easy to tear it all down. Basically, delete stack, boom, done. Okay. All right, let's see. So it's still creating. Let me go ahead and do a couple of refreshes. right? And you notice it kind of gives us this little bits of information about different parts, right? Still have a still creation in progress. All right. Notice I have this here, right? So this instance that's running is basically from that template that we are actually running here. There we go. Creation complete, right? You can see all of the events that basically happen, the timeline, all of those things. Okay, so our stack is up and running, right? Let's take a look. So I should be able to log into this, right? So there is what their default page was set up, the script's default page, to show us information about the server itself, right? So notice they've included the PHP info stuff in here, so we can see, yes, in fact, PHP is actually running and all of that, and so forth. Okay. We should also be able to log into that. So if I run putty, and let's see, load this up, and let me just plug in the public DNS there. Okay. And so here we are, right? Again, let's check this stuff out. So var www HTML. Okay. There's index PHP, right? And interesting, it's actually not marked as world readable, but it's getting it anyways. Oh, right. Oh, because it's the Apache user. All right, fine. Sudo less. And here's basically all the code for doing that, right? So again, if you're familiar, how many people have played with PHP? Couple. Basically, it's so you can see most of it's HTML. You can see the parts that are sort of PHP code that basically that are processed on the server side, and then the result is basically spit back to us. So you'll notice here where it says print out the current date and time. Right, so when I go up to here, right, it says current date and time, and notice if I check this out in terms of source, right, I don't have those PHP tags in here. PHP is actually processed on the server side, not on the client side. Okay. But that basically gives you sort of a little bit of an idea of some of the stuff that you can get set up with that. All right, questions on that much? Let's dig into the details. Okay, so yeah, that's fine, and I don't really need that. And let me go back over to my stack, and I'm going to go ahead and delete that stack because I'm done with it. All right, so let's go back over to here, and again, I'll pick this. So you notice you can actually create a Ruby on Rails stack. There's a WordPress blog. Notice they have multiple availability zone samples. So if you wanted a lamp stack but set across multiple zones, it'll set that up. There's Windows samples for you, etc. And of course, if you go to the more section, oh yes.
Like creating several instances in different.
Exactly, in different, basically spreading them out across the availability zones, right? So there's actually, you can actually sort of drill down among these to take a look at some examples and all that. Let's take a look at the one that we were just playing with, right? So if I go back over to the lamp stack one here, I did select that one, right? Yes, single instance. Okay, so I can do this. I can say View Edit in Template Designer. This Template Designer, frankly, I haven't played around much with it because, frankly, it confuses me. But I may actually play around a bit with it, a bit more with it later on. But anyways. So what you can see is there's two things here. There is this web server security group and web server itself. The raw template, you basically have two options for specifying the template. You can either use JSON. How many people have done JavaScript? Okay, so if you've done JavaScript, you're familiar with JSON. JSON basically stands for JavaScript Object Notation. So it's just a way of sort of listing out a JavaScript object. While JSON basically came about partially in response to XML. XML is super verbose. And basically, so there's a lot of stuff that you're essentially typing out with XML. So to do the equivalent in XML means you're going to have even more stuff added to it. However, for some people, in particular, it started off in the Ruby community, JSON was too verbose, and so they came up with YAML. Okay. So YAML stands for YAML ain't markup language. YAML ain't a markup language. Okay, it's recursive, just the way PHP is, right? PHP stands for PHP Hypertext Processor. So the YAML, again, you can specify it however you want. If you want to do it in YAML, if you want to do it in JSON. The examples I'm going to do are in YAML just because I think it's so much cleaner, easier to look at and all of that. I'm going to run through, I'll kind of talk briefly about these things, then we'll actually kind of see a much simpler template because this is kind of doing a lot of lifting right now. And so really what I want to do is sort of strip it way back to kind of almost the simplest version that we can get and go from there, right? But you'll see, so for instance, there's a description section, right? And we actually had seen this description on the page, right? Then parameters, guess what those do? Right, so there's how the parameters section, that asked for things like what was the key pair that we were going to use, what was the name of the database, etc. So all of those things, that's basically how they can be specified. You'll notice that there's things like regular expressions here for defining basically a pattern that can be entered by the user. In the case of, for instance, these strings, some length things and so forth. Right? Instance type, okay, so then we get down, instance type. Instance type actually still is one of the parameters. Notice, lots of allowed values, right? So there's a bunch of stuff listed there. There's your SSH location. Mappings, again, mappings basically are just, you can think of them as glorified dictionaries that you can then look up things in later on in your script, right? So there's kind of a lot of, again, there's a lot of setup here going on. Down to right. So here's all the here's the mappings for all the different regions, right? Resources. Okay, this is actually the kind of important thing. So this is where you're actually creating particular resources, like for instance a server, like for instance a security group. Okay, so those things basically are going to happen under resources, and again, we'll sort of see a simpler example of this rather than kind of dealing with all that. Then we kind of again, so there's a security group, right? We can have some metadata stuff in here, and that's about it for that. Okay, so that's a semi-complicated version of a stack. Okay, let's take a look at creating one of these things real simply from scratch, just to spin up a simple web server based on Amazon's Linux. Okay. So basically, you can use whatever text editor you want. Typically, in fact, yesterday I was using Notepad++ for this. What I did find, however, is it turns out that the syntax of YAML. So let me do this. Cloud. The syntax of YAML explicitly forbids tabs. And Notepad++ has this fun habit of basically auto-indenting using tabs, and so that becomes me fighting against the editor. So what I found out today was actually that brackets doesn't do this, so that's actually what I'm going to use. But again, you can use whatever editor you want. So here I happen to have the brackets editor. Let me just go open folder and select that particular folder that I just created, which is here. Okay. And so we'll create a brand new file. And the first thing I'm going to do is just do a save so I can give this thing a name. So I'm going to call this simple Amazon Linux web.yaml, YAML. Okay. Now, you can. I'll provide links and all of that for the documentation for this. A lot of the contents of the template file are optional. Okay, couple of things. So one that is optional, but that you tend to see in most is this one, the AWS template format version, and basically it's it is a date. So 2010 -09. Okay, so that's the particular version that of the format that we're actually using. Then we can have a description, right? So that whole description stuff that we saw previously, right? So I'll have creates an Amazon Linux web server. Okay. Parameters. I'm not going to deal with any right now. Again, I want to keep it dead simple, just down to sort of the bare minimum for illustrating our point. Okay, so I'm not going to parameterize anything. I'm just going to deal with the raw resources themselves. Okay, so in terms of the, don't tab, 2 spaces in. Okay, so in terms of the resources, I want an EC2. I'm going to call it EC2 instance. Okay, and I could have called this whatever I want. In fact, actually, if you refer back to did I keep that up? I didn't. So here they called theirs web server instance. I could have called mine web server instance as well. I mean, the particular name doesn't necessarily matter. The way that it actually does know about what we're really talking about is the type, right? So the type is defined by Amazon. So again, if you sort of look at the general reference for these things, or kind of the way that I did it, which is kind of looking at other examples, you can basically pull these out, right? So here we're defining a resource that is an AWS EC2 instance. Okay. Then we need the properties of the instance. So there's a few things that we actually need. One of the most important is the image ID. Okay. Now, we didn't really talk about this before because we didn't really have much to say about this, but let me show you what this is about. So when I go to EC2, and really, why is that still showing? Did it just not update? Yes. Okay. So when we go to launch instance, when you select the particular image, notice to the right is actually this funny looking number. Okay, that's the image ID. Now, the thing that you need to know about this is the image ID is also tied to a particular region. So, for instance, notice that, let me see if I can get this to work. Okay, so if I go to EC2 and I go to image ID, so this is the image ID, so this is the image ID that I'm looking for. Okay, so if I go to EC2 and I go to image ID, so this is the image ID that I'm looking for. Okay, so if I go to EC2 and I go to image ID, so this is the image ID that I'm looking for. Okay, so if I go to EC2 and I go to image ID, so this is the image ID that I'm looking for. Okay, so if I go to EC2 and I go to image ID, so this is the image ID that I'm looking for. Okay, so if I go to EC2 and I go to image ID, so this is the image ID that I'm looking for. Okay, so if I go to EC2 and I go to image ID, so this is the image ID that I'm looking for. Okay, so if I go to EC2 and I go to image ID, so this is the image ID that I'm looking for. Okay, so if I go to EC2 and I go to image ID, so this is the image ID that I'm looking for. Okay, so if I go to EC2 and I go to image ID, so this is the image ID that I'm looking for. Okay, so if I go to EC2 and I go to image ID, so this is the image ID that I'm looking for. Okay, so if I go to EC2 and I go to image ID, so this is the image ID that I'm looking for. Okay, so if I go to here's the value there when I'm in Ohio. If I change this to Virginia, I have a different number. Okay. So based on the particular region that we're going to use, we will end up with slightly different image numbers. Okay, so you do need to be kind of aware of. Oop, I don't want that. Sorry, aware of that. Okay, so I basically just hard-coded in my image. Then, what type of image do I want? So I'm just going to say, you know what? Let's use the T2 micro image. Okay, basically sort of that default that we get when right. So notice it's defaulting to T2 micro, and happy, it's free tier eligible. Okay, so we'll be thrifty and just tie it into that. Now, for a security group, okay, for the security groups, basically we have, sorry, see, I've tabbed these in, darn it. Okay. The security groups, we have a list, which basically is specified, or one way it's specified in YAML is to use this dash notation. Okay. Now, the security group that we're going to use hasn't been created yet. Okay. It's going to be defined within this file, and so we use ref. Notice, exclamation ref saying we're referring to something else, another name inside this file. And again, I can call it whatever I want. I'm going to call it Web Server Security Group. Like so. Now, one note about this, and I actually hadn't added it here. I guess I should probably mention this now. Let me go back to, yeah. Okay, so the example that I'm doing, I basically sort of stole from somebody else, but then simplified it. So I have a link, so I have this link, for instance, right here. So if you want to learn sort of everything there is to know about CloudFormation templates and all that, this GitHub repo basically kind of walks you through a whole bunch of stuff. Now they talk about, setting up and doing a clone. You don't even have to do that. Look, you can kind of go through, notice, you can basically read, they sort of show, it's almost like a little sort of lab setup, right? So they kind of show you, oh, here's what you would do. Again, you can kind of read through these to say, for instance, in simple template, yep, load it up. Right, so they typically have stubs, and then basically they have also the sample solutions and things like that. Anyways, so as I said, so I stole it from this here, but you'll notice theirs again is still fairly complicated because they have these region mappings and all of that. Again, I want it simpler, not more complex. So yes, so generally I should probably do something like this. We'll say, okay, there's that. And that's how you reference something on the web. Easy peasy, right? Give me the URL, give me the last date of access. Why? Because stuff on the web can change, but we can use things like the Wayback Machine to go back and get it. All right, so we have our reference, our sort of forward reference to the web security group. Then, right, tags. Okay, the main feature that this is going to give us, actually, you know what? I'll leave this out for right now. We'll kind of come back to that. User data. Okay. Just like the manual process that we had been going through, where I copied the script from my GitHub repo into user data, we can do the same thing here. That is, we can provide some form of user data to be used basically by. Oops. To be used for creation. Okay. Now, we need to use a function. namely the base64 function, because the user data technically needs to be base64 encrypted. So that's how we use that. Then we can say, okay, do a sub, right? The OR bar basically in YAML here simply says we're basically just tacking all of this stuff on that's below here. Okay, so we have our typical what is referred to in Bash speak as the shebang. The hash sign or the pound sign denotes a comment, and then the exclamation mark basically for the particular script that we're referring to. Okay. And what we needed to do, so we needed to say yum install, and I'll do a tac y for automatically select yes, and basically install HTTPD. Okay. Then the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and automatically configure or set up the default page. So I will cd to var www html like so. And then I'll just throw something out using an echo saying, let's just do h1. And of course, as we saw, we do have to remember to start the service. So service start, service, sorry, HTTPD, and start. Question? Oh, you're right, yes. Thank you. Yes, should that be directed to a file? Absolutely. There we go. Okay. So there's that. Then I want, let's see, what column am I at? Is that lined up? That's not lined up. There. Okay. So now our web server security group. Again, you know, I could have named this foo bar whatever. The name isn't meaningful except for make sure that your ref matches the thing that you are in fact referring to. EC2, and this is a security group. Okay. And then the properties for that. Let's, yeah. Call it whatever we want. So there's the description. More importantly are these rules. Okay. So our rules for basically who's allowed to connect and so forth. Again, so we can set these up right here. So here for the web portion, I'm just going to say we'll allow anybody to connect from anywhere. On port 80, using TCP, and again, the 2-port. Okay. Also, you can have an outputs section. So, for instance, So our EC2 instance and basically access its public IP. All right, so there is a semi-simple template.
There are two columns for when you created an instance, but when you created the security group, you kept only one column.
Did I? Thank you. Nope. Here. Yes. All right. So now that we have that, let's make it happen. All right, so we can close that. Yes. Close, leave page. This is, yeah, I don't need this anymore either. Let's go back to my instances. Okay, create new stack, and then I'll do browse, and we'll go to the desktop. All right. Now, had I had an error, it would have actually let me know that, yes, in fact, there is an error. Anyway, so let's try simple web. Okay, again, don't need to select anything else there. We didn't have any parameters. Again, happy. Notice there's our description and so forth. Let's go ahead and click create. Right, so I do in fact have a server running. Now, over in outputs, notice there it is. There's what we output, right? So we had specified, okay, what's the URL? There's the actual URL, and there's the page itself. Okay. Now, couple of other things. So one, notice there is this there's an option for your instances where you can actually provide a name, right? So I mean, I happen to know this is my simple web server, but it would kind of be nice for that to automatically be in there, right? And we can do that. So let me go ahead and delete this. So back over in the properties for this, this is where we can add a tag, right? And the main tag that we want to make this happen is the name tag, and I can basically set its value to whatever I want. So I can say Amazon Linux Web Server. Okay. Also, let me go ahead and introduce some sort of error in here. Let's do something like that. Let's see what this one generates. Create a stack, and we'll go to browse, and we'll grab this thing. Okay, and we'll click next. Right. And so notice it says, okay, there's a validation error, template, unrecognized resource type, AWS : EC2 : security group, right? So I could actually just grab that as a string, search for it, etc. In my bless you. Yay. Nope, not yet. Said it was complete. It lied. There it is. Okay, so there it's up, and furthermore, let me go here and refresh this. There it is. Okay. Questions about this much?
Can we also write the code to put the stack name automatically?
I don't think so. I think you do still have to name it manually. All right. Now, so what would it take to turn this to basically do the same thing for Ubuntu, right? So we saw before that before we were dealing with Ubuntu and all of that, and you can actually create really whatever kind of instance you want. So let me go ahead and rename this. So we'll call this one Simple Ubuntu Web. All right, come over to here and let's open that up. And right, so obviously this is not. This is going to create. Okay. Now. Suggestions on what the first thing is we need to change here. The image ID, exactly, right? Because the image ID basically defines, well, which image we're using, and this one essentially says, hey, use the Amazon Linux AMI. Okay, easy enough to get that, right? Again, go over to here. We can drop, there's Ubuntu, right? And there's the AMI. Okay, so I make that change. Now, then in terms of the other changes and so forth, right? So again, we kind of have seen stuff for this and everything. So let me go back to, I guess, wherever. Right, so here's my GitHub. Here is the EC2 scripts. I'm just going to go to the basic Ubuntu, right? And then let's sort of take a look at what stuff we might need, right? So this is oh, I can do that. No split. Yeah, cool. There we are. All right, so let's just make this look the same way. So set E, set X. Don't technically need the stuff about the prompts right now. I may actually still want the setting the time zone, and so I'll add that in. The directory stuff I'm not going to do right now. Part of the reason is because this setup is not going to actually allow me to log into the server. I'm not even going to create it with a particular key pair, so I have no way of logging into this server. Okay, the only access we have is the web access. All right, so again, it doesn't use they don't use yum. Instead, sudo apt-get update sudo apt get install Apache 2. Okay. I could also have done the upgrade -y. I'm just not going to do it for time's sake. And again, then I'm going to continue to leave this in there. I also don't need to start the server, because as we know, when we install it through apt-get, it's actually going to start it up for us. Okay, so that should basically give us well, what it is that we want. All right, let's take a look at that then. Try it out. Okay. Back over to here. Yes, create the stack and do a browse and grab this. Right, again, no real options here. Go ahead and create that, and it's off to the races. Now, while that's doing that, let me talk a little bit about advantages, disadvantages, alternatives, these kinds of things. One of the reasons that infrastructure as code is nice, well, has to do with a sort of personality decision, right? So if you're typically a DevOps type, if you're a DevOps person, especially if you've come from the development side, you tend to deal a lot with you tend to like coding in general. And the nice thing about this is that I can drop this in the same place that I have the source code for my system. So I can throw this into a revision control system like Git, and then when I make changes to it and so forth, I can basically have that updated in Git. I can have it tagged for versions and all of those kinds of things. So from that standpoint, there are a lot of niceties. It's also fairly lightweight. I mean, let's face it, it's just a text file, so that basically is that makes it fairly simple to move around and all of that. An alternative that we haven't actually looked at yet, and we will at some point, is once I've created a running instance, I can actually create a snapshot of that instance to basically create my own image based off of that configuration. So that's an alternative, at least for the for the EC2 side of this, right? That is, you can set up your server manually, put all the stuff you want on it, put all the API, all the SSH keys, any libraries, etc., and basically have that set up, and then simply create an image out of that can then be used for the rest of the stuff. So then when you need to actually basically have a new instance spun up, either for load balancing and scaling and all these kinds of things, you don't actually have to worry about sort of the time that it's going to take for it to run installs and all of that. Basically, when it spins up the image, just sort of spins it up, all the stuff's already installed, it's basically ready to go. So they're related, but we don't have the equivalent of is the additional stuff that we can get from CloudFormation of, for instance, setting up an entire VPC, setting up all of your security groups, all of those things. We don't have that equivalent in terms of creating that image itself. Okay, that seems to be running. Let's go to outputs. There's this, and really screwed something up. You claim that you are done, but it appears you are not done. Try here. Okay, unable to connect. Let's take a look. So here's the rules for that. Let's double check that. Let's double check that. Yeah, that's not terribly helpful. Yes, that's fine. Okay. I have a feeling you know what I have a suspicion. All right, let's. So, how do we debug this stuff? Well, it is a pain. So one way is basically check out the system logs. So I can come to the system log here, see if we can find where it's dying a horrible death. Oh. Yeah. So the TAC-Y, without the TAC-Y, essentially it was sitting there saying, hey, do you want to install all this stuff and all that? So yes. All right. Back over to here. Oh, yes, because the name still exists, so fine.
Can we edit the already created image?
Sorry?
Can we edit the .yml file which is already created a system?
There are ways of updating the sort of existing stuff. So yeah, there are sort of ways that you can actually do that. But it's also easy enough. So for instance, if you have something in production and you know, okay, I need to make this particular change, yeah, you can actually update that. There are, from what I understand, there's actually some rules about some things can change, some things can't. Okay, let's see this. Yes. Output. There it is. Okay. 10 minutes. Just enough time. Okay, so let's make this beefier. So as I said, right now I can't log into that server. Okay, we didn't install a key pair to it or anything like that, and so we don't have that ability. So maybe we actually want to make this kind of a more complete version. So let's do that. So again, I'm just going to copy and paste. Okay, so I'll call this Simple Ubuntu Web 2. All right. So this time, I'm gonna actually add in some parameters. Okay. So for the key pair, I mean, we could actually add that. I could hard code in the particular key that I wanted to use. And again, for particular purpose, for depending on the situation, I may actually want that, right? So in the case of if I'm dealing with a particular company and I know that I already have my key pairs created, I can hard code that key pair in here, that key pair name, and basically everything's good to go. On the other hand, if I do want to offer some flexibility, I can do just that, right? So I'll create a parameter, again, called key name. Again, the point, remember, I'm giving it a meaningful name, but I could call this foo and it wouldn't make any difference. Okay, the way that it knows about this. Okay, so one, we'll give it a description. the type. So the type, and this is going to be AWS : EC2 : key pair : key name. Califragilisticexpialidocious. All right. Constraint description. All right, so there's our constraint. Then basically where essentially the CIDR block for where we're allowing SSH from. For a web server, yeah, it probably makes sense that that port 80 is open to everybody. For SSH, again, you know, restricting that to the locales of where it is appropriate for someone to log in is probably a better bet. Two instances. Okay. What's its type? It's just a string. Okay. So it turns out there's nothing actually special for that, but then we can do things like say, okay, there's maybe a minimum length, and that's going to be 9, and there's a max length, and that's going to be 18, and the default, which can be everywhere. Right? Or, since I happen to know that I'm going to create, that I'm the one that's going to be using this and creating it, let me just go ahead and put in maybe a meaningful one. Here it is. Then I don't have to keep typing it. USF SSH. So there's the default I'm going to use. Generally, yeah, it might make more sense if I was putting this out for anybody in the world to use. I might want to have just the 00. Okay, so the allowed pattern. Basically, this is a regex. So we're going to say basically 0 through 9 and 1 to 3 of those. Sorry, 1, 3 of those. Okay, then a period, followed by, again, 0 through 9. Let's do it this way. Copy and paste will be my friend. So we need 4 of these. 1, 2, 3, 4, but not the last period. Okay, then a slash, and then I'll do that, but realistically, I want that to be like so. Okay. Must be a valid IP CIDR range of the form x.x.x.x/x. Okay. So there's our parameters. Right. Now I don't have to change the image. We already have that set appropriately. All I do need to do is I need to add in the particular key that I'm going to use, right? So key name property, and then all I have to do is refer to the previously defined parameter called key name, right? Then down here, okay, I can add in an additional list. And just to show you, there's nothing actually magical about this particular order of specifying. So for instance, I could have something like IP protocol, TCP, then I could have from port 22 to port 22, and the CIDR IP is, again, a reference to the previously defined parameter. like so. All right. The only other little changes that I'll make here is the stuff for sort of fixing the directory colors and all that. Why not just we can add that in as well. So if I go back over to here. So that's going to be in my user data section, which is here. And let's see if I can do this. And same thing for here. All right. So there's our updated script. Let's take it for a spin. So there's simple Ubuntu Web. And next. Good, no errors. Okay, so oops. Right, key name. So there's one of our parameters. Notice it gives me the key pairs that we already have. So I can select that. SSH location. There's our default, but of course I could add in something else. Okay, so there's that, and I'll click next. Right, again, that looks good to go. And it died a horrible death. Why did it die a horrible death? Is this thing? Can I move this over? Ah. There it is. Following resources failed to create web security. Do I have, let's see. Okay, we're out of time. I will double check where this error is. I'll see you next time. But the nice thing about this, notice, if you do screw up, basically, so it rolls everything back. So all the resources that it was going to create, it sort of takes all those down so you're not left in this sort of weird half state.